Hey folks, if you grew up in a Christian home, maybe you were taught this prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep. Remember that one? Well, when we were kids, our prayers, they were simple. But as adults, our grown-up prayers, let's be honest, they get complicated. We even sometimes find ourselves wondering, how should I pray? Why do I pray? Or does prayer really do anything? Well, luckily for us, Jesus' disciples, they asked some of those very same questions, and Jesus gave those disciples some grown-up answers. Jesus said, when you pray, there are three things that prayer is all about. Today, on the Daily Dose, I'm going to share two of the three things Jesus says prayer is all about, so don't go anywhere. Some 2,000 years ago, Jesus' disciples turned to Jesus and they said this. They said, Jesus, when it comes to prayer, we don't know what we're doing. Jesus, we're just not sure. Jesus, why do we pray in the first place? Jesus, would you teach us to pray? Well, fortunately for us, Jesus gave them some answers, and someone was smart enough to record his answers in the book of Matthew. And this week, we're going to walk through Jesus' answers to their grown-up questions that were all about prayer. You see, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 9, in response to the disciples' questions about prayer, Jesus said some words that may sound rather familiar to you. You see, he said, this then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, most of us are familiar with those words, right? But what was he getting at here? You see, I think Jesus recognizes, well, that if we're honest, most of our prayers, the prayers we bring to God, they begin with who? You know, most of our prayers, they begin and end with me. As a kid, we prayed, God, give me an A on that test, even though we didn't study. God, make that cute little redheaded girl in math class take notice of me. God, make sure I get that job. Make sure the presentation at the office is successful. God, get me out of this mess. Who are most of our prayers about? They're about me. Don't we do this? We pray often as though God is this cosmic vending machine in the sky. If we deposit all the right prayers, well then, God should give me everything I ask for. And I think Jesus knew this. The disciples did just what we do. And that's why he said, this then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What is Jesus getting at? Well, I think Jesus is suggesting that foundational to our understanding of prayer is that our prayer should start by recognizing that God is God and we are not. Prayer isn't about what's in it for me, rather it's the opposite. To understand prayer, we have to understand that prayer is first and foremost, well, it's about submitting. For Jesus, the purpose of prayer is to surrender our will, not to impose our will on God. Prayer is about aligning our will with God's will. Prayer isn't about moving God. Rather, prayer is about being moved by God. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. Well, here's what you know. Jesus didn't stop there. He would go on, and he would say that there are three things that prayer is all about. He'd like us, when we pray, to pray for provision, pardon, and protection. Provision, pardon, and protection. He says, give us this day our daily bread. Let me say that again. Give us this day our daily bread. It's all about provision. Now, let's be honest, myself included, most of us aren't too worried about getting enough daily bread. In fact, most of us eat more daily bread than we probably should. When Jesus first said these words, those disciples, get this, they would have immediately thought of their ancestors who were out in the wilderness hundreds of years ago. They'd been freed from slavery in Egypt. And out in the desert, they would crawl out of their tents in the morning and collect just enough bread for the day. Because that's how God provided it. God provided those Israelites day by day because God was teaching the people a lesson. He was teaching them dependence on them. He was teaching them about his faithfulness to them. Out in the wilderness, God would even say to God's people, there will be a day when you have more than your share of daily bread. In fact, you're going to have so much bread that other nations will come to you and buy your bread. But don't be deceived. Even when you have excess, you are no less dependent on me than you are now. And folks, the same is true for us. Though sometimes we forget it, God is our ultimate provider. Think about it. Many of the things we rely on the most each and every day, we have no control over them. In a sense, they are all in God's hands. So when we pray, we pause and declare our dependence on God for everything. God, give us this day our daily bread. It's all about provision. You see, God in Jesus first asks us to pray for provision. Then he says this, I want you to pray for pardon. Jesus says, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Jesus is teaching us to pray, forgive me of my failures and shortcomings. But for Jesus, that pardon had a catch. He says, pray this, God, forgive me in the same way that I've forgiven the people who have wronged me. There's a bite to those words, aren't there? I mean, what do we call people who expect others to do things that we ourselves aren't willing to do? We call them hypocrites, right? Now, this sounds harsh, but Jesus is saying, when you pray, pray that you won't be a hypocrite. Don't ask for something you aren't willing to extend to those around you. In a sense, he says, if you expect to be forgiven, then come on, forgive. Jesus is saying, when we pray, we should be mindful. Is there anyone that I have refused to forgive? Anyone I've refused to pardon? Because Jesus knows that a lack of forgiveness, it does something to our heart. You see, he prays, he coaches us. God, help them to forgive others as they expect others to forgive themselves. When those disciples asked Jesus, teach us to pray, Jesus said it's all about three things: provision, pardon, and protection. We talked about the first two today. You're going to have to join us tomorrow when we'll talk about the third.